4, 3.
We'll do it live!
Now we're live! Erin Kennedy. The general craziness of it, the impact on your life.
We have gone through so many stories and we said, you know what? This should not be kept to the two of us. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Erin.
How are you?
I'm good, but we had some sad news this week.
I was surprised a little bit. Why don't you share it?
I just thought he'd live forever, quite honestly. I mean, Harry Porterfield, if you don't know who we're talking about, was one of those iconic Chicago journalists who Erin and I both worked with at our time at WBBM. And if you grew up in Chicago, you know Harry Porterfield because he passed away at the age of 95 and was on TV until he was 87 years old. So talk about being an icon and a legend. That was Harry.
When he's also one of your Indiana neighbors.
Yes, he lived in Gary, Indiana. So he and I were about that often. And you know, Harry was one of those people I feel that you just kind of thought would always be there. Even though you knew he was 87 years old, 88 years old.
It's institution, yeah.
He's been there for so long. He's been around. He's been in the market. He's been a very important part of TV in Chicago for such a long time. So there's quite the outpouring of, you know, Harry respect this week.
Right. And so CBS Chicago did a great little tribute package. And since, you know, they have the old footage, we just wanted to watch this real quick.
Good morning. I'm Harry Porterfield.
For such a public man, a household name in Chicago, Harry Porterfield preferred attention be paid to his subjects.
To bring some awareness on the problems that veterans are having.
The city's unsung heroes and achievers.
Irving Rosenblum, seller of formal wear, and someone you should know. Richard Davenport III, junior karate champion, and someone you should know.
Tonight, Someone You Should Know, the series he brought to his viewers for decades.
Don't let them just come at you.
Harry found them fascinating and worthy of a spot in a newscast, and was certain you would agree. His judgment was impeccable.
In this, the first year the school has been involved in robotics.
He started in the news business behind the scenes as a writer in the early 1960s. But with his warmth and gravitas and that rich voice, he was destined to be on the air.
Well, Chicagoans who haven't seen their new property tax bill yet.
The polls will close in less than an hour, so let's get the final projection of voter turnout from Carol Krause.
For years, he and Bill Curtis anchored CBS 2's 6 p.m. newscast, a solid #1 in the ratings.
Kind of cold and windy up there that day.
But in the mid-1980s, station management made an ill-advised move, pulling Harry from the anchor desk. At a time when there were few black anchors in Chicago, the African-American community was incensed. Rainbow Push led a boycott of Channel 2. Harry went to ABC 7.
He said he's sorry, but that's not enough for some community activists.
In 2009, Harry returned to CBS 2, anchoring the 11 a.m. newscast and continuing Someone You Should Know.
The students have entered 5 competitions and come back with 5 awards.
It was a long and storied career that made his family proud.
He was a good person, and he, more than anything, wanted to also highlight the good in others. And it is an inspiration to me, the work that he's done and just the impact that he's had on people's lives.
She began playing a church organ when she was just 8 years old. Not like this mighty organ at Chicago's First Baptist Congregational Church.
Inducted into the TV Academy's Silver Circle, Harry was characteristically humble.
Given all the people I have profiled who have so selflessly and generously, even in the face of personal hardships to help others, I find that my efforts seem quite small by comparison.
And that's our news at 11. So long.
So long.
And after every single newscast, every single time, because I worked with Harry from when I came back to Chicago in 2010 until he retired. And I can't remember exactly what year that was, but several years we worked together, 5, 6, 7. He would say, and that was another fast-moving
extravaganza.
Now, the funny thing is, he said it one time but for some reason it tickled me. So I then asked him to say it for several weeks. And then I didn't even have to ask him after a while. I would just look at him.
And it was
kind of
there.
like it was sending us off
Yeah.
to the rest of our day. And then he did it every time without fail. So I just loved working with him. He was just the epitome of class. And
Like Jim said, yeah, Jim Williams did that package. His voice, right? I mean,
gorgeous.
right. And I think what was highlighted too in that package, that story that we just saw, is the reason we need diversity on air is to see representation that you see when you are in Chicago, which is a diverse city, right? And so he's telling the stories of other African Americans that probably wouldn't have otherwise been told, which is one of the many reasons why it was so very significant when he was demoted at CBS. And it was a real mark against the station. And
for
what
years
they say, yeah, go ahead.
For years, it was a mark against the station.
And they protested outside the station for a year.
Right. Because I think it was, if you think about that time when Harry was on the air, that was probably the 70s as an anchor and early 80s when that wasn't happening like it should have been. And it was sort of new. And then he was taken off that anchor desk. And there was no reason to take that voice and that persona and that wonderful presence off the anchor desk, right? And so I think it just, it's one of those things that then when I came back home, for me, Chicago, I remember hearing like, oh, they've got Harry back. Like, you know, the station made such a big mistake back in the 80s. It's like they were still trying to fix that poor judgment call of taking Harry off the desk.
Well, and to be honest with you, I don't think that fallout was ever rectified, because when he went to WLS, he took Black viewership with him, and I don't think they ever came back.
No, I don't think so either. And he was at ABC for many, 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 many years. Because I mean, if you think about that, he was removed from his anchor slot, it says here, as weekend anchor at BBM in 1985. And he came back to BBN in 2009. Okay, like it was 20 years plus that he was at another station.
Right.
That's a lot of time, and a year-long basically boycott of a station, that's going to leave a mark.
Mm-hmm.
But Harry, he was just the sweetest. And he and I would always have conversations about, you know, the drive back to Indiana. And, you know, he did the sauna. I remember him telling me that he did a sauna like multiple times a week. And I remember thinking at the time, and this dude's like 80 something, I should get in the sauna. Like, oh, and he made it to 95.
I wonder if you had asked him, like, what is the key to your longevity, if he would have mentioned that.
He did mention that. Yes, because I remember, I mean, I don't think I phrased it like that, but I was like, what are you doing today, Harry? And he'd say, oh, I'm going to go to the sauna, you know, with his beautiful voice. And I was like, how often do you do that? And he's like, several times a week. Like, you know, and I remember thinking at the time, like, whoa, note to self.
So as we share personal anecdotes from Harry, of which you and I both have many, you, of course, were a regular on the 11. I think it was maybe 2 years into my tenure is when we took over the 11. But before that, it was Harry and Rosie. And so I would, you know, often fill in for Rosie. And so it would be Harry and I on the desk. And Harry was a creature of habit for sure. And he was very dedicated to his craft.
Yes.
And every day he would record the newscast with a like dictaphone,
a tiny recorder,
in his suit pocket.
Yes.
And he would listen to the entirety of the 11 on his drive home to Indiana. I mean, talk about dedication
himself.
Right. So he would record the show and then listen to it. However, there was one day before the 11th started, and I was sitting there and I was like, what am I hearing? Megan, do you hear that? What am I hearing?
I don't think I did, because I was way over in the weather department.
And I kept hearing somebody talking to me. And I was like, Harry, do you hear that? And he said, no. And then I said, Harry, it's coming from your pocket. And so what had happened was, it was probably like yesterday's show, and it had somehow, you know, been on, and he hadn't heard it, you know, which was hilarious, because of course, he was older by the time he and I were anchoring together.
Oh, he had to have been in his 80s, well into his 80s at
Right.
that
And
point.
and he was wearing hearing aids and stuff. And so I don't think that clearly he didn't hear it, but it was funny. And that was the first time that I realized that he had that habit of recording everything and then listening to it again. Yeah.
And I often thought about that because I don't know about you, but I always had a hard time watching myself. Okay. Like and I remember we had a consultant come in who made us watch ourselves, take notes on our broadcast. What did we like? What did we not like? What did we say too much? I hated it.
Yeah, I don't like it either.
I just couldn't do it. And I remember thinking, like, if there's something you don't like, just tell me and I'll change it. But I don't want to watch myself, because I found what I would do then is second guess way too much about what I was doing. It was better for me just to do it. But for Harry, in that time, and you got to remember, these are like the Walter Cronkite years that Harry was in the business, right? Coming up in the business. And so for him, I think it was even more about the voice and how did it sound and how are you pronouncing things. And it's interesting because if you think about somebody who's native to this area, you say Chicago. I do, Chicago, with that very A. But if you listen to Harry in that piece, Chicago, it was very like he was practicing that. And I remember thinking, he has listened to himself and perfected every word that he's going to say. Courtesy of that tape recorder, I think. But,
yeah. No, it's interesting, and it's quite a legacy that he leaves behind, and it's amazing, I think how the industry changed from when he joined it and to where it is now, and of course the experiences that he lived through. But I think, again, to me, his legacy was giving a voice to a community that wasn't often represented when he was on air, and how very important that representation is. And I think that, especially in Gary, he's a legend.
Legend. And those Someone You Should Know segments, I was probably a baby, but we were not even born when they started. So I think initially, it was to highlight the African-American community. But then by the time we were working with Harry, it was anybody and everybody that he saw that deserved to be featured. So Harry, I think it may have started one way, and it really just ended up being this beautiful way to shed a light on somebody that was doing something really cool. So even through Harry's experiences, which many would say may have been racism and things like that he dealt with in the business, he just wanted to tell stories.
Right.
And tell them beautifully with his gorgeous voice. And if you think about it, like what he must have seen being born in 1928? I mean, before the Great Depression. Okay, he was a baby in the Great Depression. But then also what he himself changed. Because when that happened in 1985 and he moved over to ABC and all that all happened, he helped really reform the way that people were going to do business moving forward and the way they were going to treat people.
And forever changed the viewing habits of people in Chicago.
Completely. Yes, because I think BBM was the powerhouse #1 for years, in the Bill and Walter days.
And it was Bill and Walter and Harry,
Which is when it wasn't Harry.
It is such, we've talked about how this business doesn't need a rhyme or a reason to fire anybody. And it is funny, though, because Harry was so well regarded, and we will never know why they pulled him off the desk, but it is a wonder. Unless it was just straight up racism at that point. But again, I don't know. I feel like if the show is successful, I don't know. Do you know?
I don't honestly know. And I am curious because I feel like I've heard it talked about for so many years. Because like I said, when I first came back, and I remember even my agent at the time telling me that, I know you want to go back home, Megan, but the station's got some ratings issues. And I was like, I don't care. I want to go home. I was working at CBS in New York, which was honestly like one of the #1 or fighting for #1 typically. And I was like, I was so excited to go home. I didn't care
if it was #5.
Yeah. But the problem is after you get somewhere and it's #5, you realize that there are many, many inherent issues that come with not being at the top station.
Right.
Namely, always wondering like who's going to get blamed for the next ratings failure.
Terrible book. Yeah. All right. I will only share one more nugget, which was also something Harry was known for, was again being a creature of habit, and I think it's obvious he loved his job, loved it, loved coming in every day. Like this man would, I think would work forever.
He was in early too. Like keep in mind he was doing the 11 o'clock show, but he was in there early working on As Someone You Should Know. And like he wasn't just slapping together a package. He was like crafting it.
Very thoughtful. Yeah. But it would be that he would often come in on his days off.
Yes.
As in, he forgot that he had requested the day off, And so it was kind of like one of those things, because he and I actually sat next to each other in the cubbies. And so I, of course, had been there since early that morning, and he would come in at 9 a.m. for the 11. And I would look over and be like, Harry, how are you? Good to see you. You're off today. That's right. But I think, again, it was his happy place. He enjoyed it. And yeah.
Yes. And I think, I've noticed as, family members get older or whatever, it's like, you cling on to those things that defined you when you were younger, because I think in part, sometimes people are afraid to let go of those and move on to that next part of your life. Because you hear they retired and then they died or whatever. Because you lose.
Or you had one career. Yeah. I mean, you and I get that.
Yeah, I do. And it's like, if you've done it all the way up until you're 87, then when you finally are done, it's got to be like, whoa. And I did hear, I don't know the actual cause of death for Harry, but I heard it was a very short illness, and I hope he didn't suffer. I hope it was just in the night at the age of 95. But certainly what a life. What a life, and the things he saw. That's pretty amazing. It really, truly is. And seeing his little face, I just remember another fast-moving
extravaganza. That was his life too, though. I mean, it's too bad he can't send us out with that right now. But right,
and the way he always said the last word, it wasn't extravaganza, it was extravaganza.
It was almost like he rolled his R's too.
Yes,
extravaganza.
So classy and fabulous. Oh, I'm gonna miss just knowing that he's alive.
Yeah.
So
yeah. But that's all the nuggets that we were going to share today. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Meg?
Gosh, no. I want to get to the bottom of the whole story of what happened in 1985.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more on that. I don't know. There's got to be somebody who knows, but I just
I do want to chat with Bill Curtis.
Yes. And regardless of the why of it did change the landscape of Chicago as a television market for the rest of time, I think.
Still to this day. Absolutely. Yeah. Interesting.
Yep.
All right. Harry Porterfield, we are thinking of you and his family. And we, hopefully maybe we can dig out some old pictures or something too.
Yes. Another fast-moving little extravaganza, Erin.
Very good. All right. Bye, Meg. Bye, everybody.